Monsieur le Premier ministre, Monsieur Papandreou, Madame la vice-présidente du Conseil d'État, Mesdames et Messieurs, en vos titres et fonctions, chers collègues, chers amis, chers étudiants, bonsoir et bienvenue. C'est pour moi un grand plaisir, un grand honneur de vous accueillir ce soir à l'Institut, dans cette maison, la Maison de la Paix, dont j'ai le bonheur tous les jours de prononcer le nom et que je souhaite continuer à prononcer. Can democracy survive polarization? Is the question in front of us this evening. Democracy is facing a severe stress test globally, as we witness daily. Yet, it is crucial to recognize that this erosion is not sudden and not recent. According to long-term data from the Swedish Observatory for Democratic Trends, VDEM, which many of you certainly know, the number of democracies peaked in 2017, with 96 countries classified as democracies at that time. Of these, 39 were liberal democracies, a category that goes beyond electoral democracy. Fast forward to today, 2025, and the picture has darkened significantly. The total number of democracies has declined to 88, with only 29 liberal democracies remaining. The drop is even more dramatic if we take a longer horizon. In 2009, there were 45 liberal democracies. Perhaps more striking is the fact that for the first time in 20 years, autocracies outnumber democracies. 91 countries now fall under autocratic rule. And when we shift our lens from countries to populations, figures become even more sobering. Only 12% of the world's population lives in a liberal democracy, while a staggering 72% live under autocratic rule. The most affected dimensions, according to VDEM, are freedom of expression, freedom of the press, and increasingly judicial independence. As Michael Ignatieff aptly observed in 2024, in many countries today, democracy itself is on the ballot. But he also reminds us of a deeper truth, and I quote, "Our problems would be simple if we could defeat democracy's enemies at the ballot box. But our problem is that even if genuine democrats triumph, democracy's promise must be restored." The claim captures a critical dimension of the current democracy deficit, the erosion of trust in democracy, not just as an effective system of governance, but also as a legitimate regime. The challenge is not only about defending democratic institutions from external autocratic threats, it is about rebuilding public confidence in their capacity to deliver, to represent, to unify, and to mobilize. The questioning of democracy's efficiency and legitimacy runs very deep, and addressing it is really essential to any meaningful democratic renewal. Alongside the erosion of democracy over recent decades, we've witnessed the relentless rise of polarisation, a phenomenon which is global in scope and deeply intertwined with democratic decline. Both trends are not merely parallel, they are obviously mutually reinforcing. As democracy weakens, polarization intensifies, and as polarization deepens, democratic institutions and norms erode further. This negative feedback loop, where democratic fragility fuels division and separation, and where division and polarization undermines democracy, is one of the most consequential and destabilizing vicious cycles of our time. It threatens the very fabric of our social cohesion, our capacity to live with each other, but also our individual and our collective security. The roots of today's deepening polarization run long and deep. One of the long-term structural drivers is the competitive and individualistic nature of contemporary capitalism. Over time, this model has promoted a narrow definition of success, one that rewards personal greed and gain and fuels vast inequalities. It has also accelerated the fragmentation of social bonds, fostering increasing individualization and weakening collective solidarity. The consequences are now unmistakable. A widespread sense of fragility growing resentment, and deepening fear about the future. These sentiments are further amplified by the environmental costs of our model of growth. Externalities that not only threaten ecosystems, but also deepen social and economic insecurities and sustain eco-anxiety, particularly within younger generations, which will have to bear the brunt of it. In this context, polarization is not just a political phenomenon. It is, in fact, a reflection of deeper systemic imbalances that challenge both democratic resilience and societal cohesion. As early as 1951, Hannah Arendt had warned us of a dangerous dynamic that remains strongly relevant today. In her seminal work on totalitarianism, she demonstrated how the disintegration of the social fabric, when combining with rising fear and resentment, creates fertile ground for the manipulation of hate and isolation. These conditions, she argues, are precisely what authoritarian regimes exploit and thrive on. Her analysis reminds us that authoritarianism and the erosion of democracy do not emerge in a vacuum. They feed on social fragmentation, emotional vulnerability, and the erosion of shared language and shared meaning. Beyond the diagnosis of the erosion of democracy and its connection with the rise of polarization, the next question obviously should be how to revive democratic spaces, how to create dynamics of reconnection and enable new forms of participation that can progressively rebuild trust one step at a time and legitimate democratic practices. On this, we are clearly in urgent need of political imagination, of courageous leadership and collective mobilization. Because of its history and because of the values it carries, there's a powerful role and responsibility on that front for Geneva as a whole. The Democracy Week, which is now in its 8th year, is a clear sign that the city and the state take that role and responsibility very seriously. We are proud and we are honored at the Geneva Graduate Institute of our long-standing collaboration with the State of Geneva on the annual Democracy Week. This event marks the opening of our own program here at the Institute for the 2025 edition of the Democracy Week. I would like to take the opportunity to express my sincere gratitude to the team at the Institute's Albert Hischman Center for Democracy. My thanks go to the center co-directors, Professor Graziella Morais-Silva and Professor Gopalan Balachandran, to Christine Lutringer, who is the executive director of the center, as well as to the entire team for their dedication and their continued engagement for tonight's event, but for the many to come, and also throughout the year for making this topic, democracy, a very lively one here at the Institute. Professor Graziella Morais-Silva will be moderating the discussion with Mr. Papandreou. Mr. Papandreou does not need much by way of introduction. Former Prime Minister of Greece between 2009 and 2011, Mr. Papandreou currently serves as Member of Parliament and represents the Hellenic Parliament in the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. Over the years, he has played a leading role in shaping key recommendations aimed at strengthening democracy, human rights, and the rule of law across the Council's 47 member states. He now serves as the Council's General Rapporteur on democracy. Things that I didn't know: he was born in St. Paul, Minnesota, and was educated in the United States, Canada, and Sweden, which is a country very dear to my heart. He returned to Greece following the restoration of democracy in 1974, and soon after completed his studies with a BA in sociology from Amherst College in Massachusetts, followed by a Master in Sociology and Development from the London School of Economics. Amherst College later awarded him with an honorary doctorate in law in 2002. Elected to Parliament in 1981, Mr. Papandreou held numerous ministerial roles: Minister of Education and Foreign Affairs, before becoming Prime Minister during the outbreak of the Greek financial crisis. successfully, and we were talking about that just before, steering the country away from bankruptcy. In 2004, he was elected leader of PASOK, the Pan-Hellenic Socialist Movement, and from 2006 to 2022, he served as president of the Socialist International. Since June 2025, Mr. Papandreou has taken a new role as president of the International Olympic Truth Center, a joint initiative of Greece and of the International Olympic Committee. The center promotes Olympic ideals, peace, and international understanding. Globally, Mr. Papandreou has deployed green diplomacy, advocating for environmental protection and placing sustainable development at the heart of policy making and multilateral cooperation. Welcome again, Mr. Papandreou. We are really, truly honored to have you with us and looking very much forward to listening to you. But before that, I would like to hand over the floor to Ms. Anne Hiltpold, who is the Vice President of the Conseil d'État of Geneva and Head of the Department of Public Education in the state of Geneva. Thank you.
Monsieur l'ancien Premier ministre et rapporteur général sur la démocratie auprès du Conseil de l'Europe, Madame la directrice de l'IHED, Mesdames et Messieurs en vos titres et fonctions, c'est un honneur pour moi de participer à l'ouverture de cette nouvelle édition de la Semaine de la démocratie, consacrée cette année au thème « Réinventer la démocratie entre tradition et innovation » et de vous adresser quelques mots ce soir au nom du Conseil d'État. Le choix de ce thème ne doit rien au hasard. La démocratie est un héritage que nous avons le devoir de préserver, mais c'est aussi un projet en devenir qui doit s'adapter aux mutations profondes de nos sociétés. Tradition et innovation ne s'opposent pas. Elles se complètent pour que ce système politique demeure vivant, légitime et capable de répondre aux défis du temps présent. À cet égard, nous avons le grand privilège d'accueillir aujourd'hui M. George Papandreou, ancien Premier ministre de Grèce et figure engagée du débat démocratique international qui posera cette question essentielle. Can democracy survive polarisation? Est-ce que la démocratie peut survivre à la polarisation? Cette question nous concerne toutes et tous, car la polarisation alimentée par les réseaux sociaux, par la désinformation ou par des fractures sociales et économiques menace de transformer le pluralisme en affrontement. Face à ce défi, Genève, ville mais aussi canton du dialogue, siège des Nations Unies et de tant d'organisations internationales, a une responsabilité particulière, celle d'offrir des espaces de réflexion, d'éducation et d'action pour une citoyenneté éclairée. Les données récentes nous rappellent que l'adhésion à la démocratie ne va pas de soi. Une enquête menée au Royaume-Uni cette année, le UK Youth Poll, relève que seulement 57% des jeunes Britanniques déclarent préférer vivre en démocratie plutôt que sous un autre régime, voire même en dictature. Derrière ce chiffre, d'autres aspirations apparaissent. Une partie de ces jeunes expriment de l'indifférence quant au régime politique, ou d'autres disent souhaiter avant tout un système qui fonctionne, indépendamment de son étiquette. Mais ce constat interpelle. Il montre que si la démocratie conserve une majorité de soutien, elle n'est plus perçue comme un idéal absolu et universel. Ce constat nous oblige à redoubler d'efforts pour expliquer, transmettre et incarner ces valeurs auprès des jeunes générations. En tant que magistrate chargée de l'instruction publique, de la formation et de la jeunesse, je me permets de souligner que c'est précisément ce que fait l'école publique genevoise. Elle prépare les jeunes à développer leur potentiel, à s'ouvrir aux autres et à exercer leur esprit critique. Elle leur offre toutes les chances de participer pleinement et de façon responsable à la vie d'une société libre. Les cours organisés dans le cadre du plan d'études roman et dans le cadre des plans d'études de l'enseignement secondaire 2 permettent d'aborder les enjeux contemporains. Outre la démarche pédagogique globale menée tout au long de l'année par le personnel enseignant, des ateliers à visée spécifique sont aussi mis sur pied ici et là dans nos établissements. En voici quelques exemples. Les liens entre intelligence artificielle et démocratie, en apprenant à distinguer les faits des manipulations et à exercer un regard lucide sur l'information. L'esprit critique à travers l'étude de biais cognitifs pour comprendre comment se forment nos jugements et pourquoi il est vital de les interroger. Les ateliers Genève Débat, où les élèves s'exercent à la prise de parole argumentée et à l'écoute des opinions divergentes. Ou encore les dialogues philosophiques qui éveillent dès l'école primaire à la réflexion collective et au respect, ainsi qu'à la capacité de construire ensemble. Ces initiatives ne sont pas de simples activités scolaires. Elles sont l'expression d'une conviction. La démocratie n'est jamais donnée une fois pour toutes. Elle se vit, elle s'apprend, elle se pratique dès le plus jeune âge. Mesdames et messieurs, si la démocratie est parfois fragile, elle est aussi extraordinairement résiliente. Elle se renouvelle chaque fois que nous choisissons le débat plutôt que l'invective, l'écoute plutôt que la fermeture, la responsabilité collective plutôt que le repli individuel. C'est pourquoi je suis convaincue que cette semaine sera riche en réflexions et en échanges et qu'elle contribuera à nourrir notre engagement démocratique ici à Genève comme au-delà de nos frontières. Je me réjouis que cette conférence inaugurale se déroule dans un lieu dont le nom évoque à lui seul le dialogue et la recherche de solutions communes, la Maison de la Paix. Je vous souhaite à toutes et tous une excellente semaine de la démocratie et je me réjouis d'entendre M. Papandreou. Merci pour votre attention.
Bonsoir. Good evening to all. My sincere thanks to the outstanding team of the Albert Hischman Center on Democracy, the Geneva Graduate Institute, and the Canton of Geneva for making this event a reality. It's a great honor. It's a pleasure to be here with you during the Geneva Democracy Week for this important dialogue on the future of our democracies, as you mentioned, which are truly in peril around the world. And I certainly hope that our discussions will continue and flourish in the long run. So democracy was born the moment humanity chose dialogue over domination, words instead of weapons. And the question before us today is simple yet profound. Can we still make that choice? Because as both our previous speakers mentioned, we see a decline in democracy. But democracy was never meant to erase conflict. It was created because human beings learned, often through pain and tragedy, that when anger replaces understanding and when rage silences reason, societies fall apart. Author Emily Katz-Anhalt, in her book Enraged, tells us that Homer's Iliad deeply influenced the development of democracy. Because the Iliad begins with one word, meaning, or rage. And from that rage followed thousands of deaths. The Iliad was not only a story of heroism, but also a story of the consequences of violence, arrogance, brutality, masculine machismo, a story of blood, rape, looting. One could consider this story the first anti-war literature. It teaches us that unrestrained anger or wrath and the pursuit of honor through violence destroy not only the enemy, but our own community. The Iliad was read by generations after generations of young Greeks. It became a moral awakening where Greeks began to imagine a different way, not a celebration of heroic glory, but a warning about its futility. One where power could be shared, disputes resolved by words rather than weapons, and human dignity preserved through participation and dialogue. Democracy, in that sense, was, amongst other things, an innovation of conflict management, a moral innovation, a way to manage conflict without violence, to transform anger into argument and division into dialogue, a way to resolve disputes peacefully. The Secretary General of the Council of Europe, a fellow Swiss, Alain Berset, often speaks of what he calls democratic security. At its heart, this means protecting something precious, the capacity of free societies to manage disagreement within institutions built on trust, empathy, and collective reasoning. In recent years, as war has returned to our continent, we have spoken often about defending Europe. But democratic security reminds us that true defense is not only protecting borders, it is about safeguarding the values, the practices that made Europe a peaceful continent in the first place. That is why the UN Charter of Universal Human Rights and our own European Convention on Human Rights must be seen not only as legal documents, but as foundations of peace, pillars of a shared moral and democratic order. So perhaps our question today should not be, can democracy survive polarization? But it should be rephrased, why are democracies no longer able to do what they were designed to do, to transform division into dialogue and conflict into consensus? The crisis of our time is not that we disagree. Disagreement is natural, even necessary. The crisis is that we have lost the means to disagree constructively, to make disagreement productive, creative, even a source of common understanding. The ancients understood democracy as a fragile moral technology, freedom sustained by self-restraint, empathy, and reason, not merely a system of rules, but a discipline of the soul. So the real test before us is not whether democracy can survive polarization, but whether we can recover the civic virtues that once made it strong: trust, reason, compassion, empathy, the courage to listen. Recovering these virtues also means rethinking how we educate. We no longer train citizens, we train professionals, often for jobs that may soon disappear. If democracy is to endure, civic education and a democratic culture must once again become central. We must teach not only skills for work, but the skills for living together and space for genuine participation. I will return to this later. But as General Rapporteur for Democracy in the Council of Europe, from my experience leading also a major financial crisis, I know that there are deeper systemic forces eroding our institutions, our practices, and our democratic spirit. Think for a moment about the Olympic Games. Victory there was about more than winning. It was about respect, fairness, and peace, symbolized by the Olympic truce, when even armies put down their weapons for 1,100 years, a long tradition. The Games celebrated excellence in our shared humanity. They taught the rule of law, the same rules for everyone, turning competition into kind of a school for virtue. Now compare that to the Roman arena. There, domination was the goal. It was a theater of blood, where the powerful ruled by whim. Victory wasn't earned by merit, but granted by the emperor's thumb. Something like what we do today, as we are little emperors on our social media. So the Olympics celebrated the rule of law, the arena of the rule, or the law of the strong. What should we choose today? And this brings me to my second point, which is justice. Democracy isn't defended by weapons. It's defended by citizens who treat each other with respect, by leaders who choose dialogue over domination, and by institutions that protect fairness and equality. Because in the end, there can be no peace, there will be polarization without justice. Socrates once challenged his fellow Athenian, Thrasymachos, who claimed that justice is nothing more than the interest of the stronger, that those in power make laws to serve themselves. Socrates disagreed. He argued that a society cannot endure unless its laws are guided by ethical principles and serve the common good, not the advantage of the few. For him, a just society was the highest form of a good society. Justice was not only a moral aspiration, it was the very framework of a healthy and flourishing community. Aristotle later added that laws must uphold not only their letter, but also their spirit. That true justice requires interpretation shaped by fairness and humanity. So let me say a word about this democratic spirit. From Aristotle to our contemporary John Rawls, great thinkers have reminded us that justice is not an automatic byproduct of economic growth. It does not simply emerge from prosperity. It must be nurtured through wise governance, leadership guided by ethics, oriented towards the common good. Aristotle taught that laws must serve not only their letter, but their spirit. I see this vividly in the work at the Council of Europe. I also monitor a country called Hungary. Prime Minister Orban, his party, won a simple majority, yet through electoral laws, it was transformed into a supermajority, allowing unilateral changes to the Constitution, and through that, control of the courts, of media, and even of universities. Legally, it was permitted, yes, but it violated the spirit of the law, which was meant to ensure, with a two-thirds majority, that there would be dialogue, consensus, and deliberation. So democracy is not merely a set of rules. It is an ethos of debate, respect, and fairness in practice, not just in theory. But of course, this spirit will be influenced if power becomes concentrated. Let us look at the United States today. I hear, and many trust, that strong institutions will defend democracy, stop the US from sliding into autocracy. But what happens when laws are bent, reinterpreted by those who hold power? So we must ask not only what the law says, but who holds the power to interpret it, change it, or even undermine it. From its beginning in Athens, democracy was built to disperse power, to prevent its concentration in the hands of the few and its abuse against the many. It was founded on a radical idea that ordinary citizens could imagine and decide their own future together. No need for tyrants or kings or self-proclaimed prophets to dictate our fate. And in the ancient world, the abuse of power was called hubris, an act of arrogance against the natural and moral order, a crime against the gods themselves. Today, power has migrated once again, away from the demos, from citizens and their elected institutions, into the hands of, I would say, global private interests that operate beyond democratic accountability. Economic might now shapes politics, often without the consent or even the awareness of government. And as Aristotle warned, such inequality breeds stasis, or civic conflict, or civil war. When citizens feel excluded from prosperity, when systems serve the few, when humiliation replaces dignity, anger grows. It's this disillusionment which Aristotle predicted, not democracy itself, that drives people into the arms of demagogues promising protection and revenge. Strife is born of rival claims of justice between the rich and the poor. Justice for one is seen as injustice for the other. In such moments, demagogues exploit anger. And once polarization, conflict, and chaos ensue, many call for strong and decisive leadership to bring back order. And that paves the way to tyranny. Well, that's what Aristotle believed. So authoritarianism, in this sense, is not the cause of democracy's decline, it is its consequence. Aristotle's remedy was timeless. Justice means the rule of law over the rule of men, a strong middle class, or more equality, civic friendship, and institutions that keep power in check. And wise governance oriented to the common good, but which should be the experience of all citizens. But what's the lived experience today in our globalized world? In truth, globalization is not really the right word. We should speak instead of globalized capitalism, a global neoliberal economic order. And yes, global trade has lifted millions out of poverty, most notably in China. But it also has created an economic order where wealth, capital, and data move freely across borders, while accountability does not. It has created new divides. Governments still carry the burden of responsibility to educate, to protect, to provide health care and security. But the social contract that once bound societies together, the fair deal struck between state workers and employers, from Europe a welfare system to Roosevelt's New Deal, this has been broken. In this globalized economy, states have lost much of their power to regulate financial flows or to tax the vast fortunes often hidden in offshore havens. The result, extreme inequality. According to Oxfam, the richest 1% now own more wealth than the bottom 90% of humanity combined. In the past decade alone, they have amassed more than $33.9 trillion, enough to end global poverty 20 times over. And this inequality is not only economic, it is also environmental. Oxfam also shows that the richest 1% are responsible for 16% of the global carbon emissions, the same as the poorest 5 billion people combined. The International Labour Organization 2025 State of Social Justice Report confirms what Aristotle foresaw over 2,000 years ago, that inequality is not only unjust, but deeply destabilizing. Despite our progress, more than 800 million people still live on less than $3 a day. 1 in 4 lacks access to safe drinking water. Half the world's workers remain trapped in insecure or informal jobs. Gender gaps persist, and the right to organize and bargain collectively is being eroded. These are not simply economic failures. It is not just inequality. It is injustice that tears societies apart. So the persistence of inequality, the erosion of rights, and weakening of trust show that our institutions have drifted from what John Rawls called the basic structure of justice. But the consequences is more than injustice. It is the capture of democracy itself. Let me expand on this. During the financial crisis, I saw this firsthand. Despite painful reforms and unprecedented budget cuts, we were by far the most reform-oriented and budget cut-oriented country in OECD. It was not our parliaments, but the rating agencies and market actors who dictated the terms of our survival, overruling our democratic decisions. Corporations from big pharma to finance to digital are wealthier than many nations. Jeff Bezos, I remember, when struggling with our debt, had private wealth larger than the total GDP of Greece. Power has shifted from citizens to market players, from accountability to impunity. And when wealth becomes power, extreme wealth becomes extreme power. Oligarchs now control not only markets, oligopolies or monopolies, but through their wealth, and I see this around the world, have bought up media, football clubs, even schools and museums, shaping minds as well as economies. Their influence extends through lobbying, through corruption, and manipulation of information, eroding the rule of law, capturing politics itself. Democracy is meant to serve citizens, not the powerful few. But when financial and corporate forces can buy access, dictate narratives, game our political systems and electoral processes, representation becomes a simple illusion. So a basic reason for today's crisis is that inequality has become power itself. And unless we reclaim this power through justice, transparency, and democratic accountability, our democracies will remain free in name, but not in truth. Let me add another dimension. It was mentioned by Professor Salles. Today's economic and technological reality has created what we might call an age of insecurity. As Astra Taylor so insightfully writes, insecurity today is not simply about money or jobs. It has become the defining experience of our time. It reaches almost into every corner of our life. It's the anxiety of a generation unsure whether the planet will sustain their dreams. It is the unease of workers watching algorithms and automation replace their labor. It is the fear of people displaced by conflict, poverty, or the climate crisis. It is the exhaustion of societies that endured a pandemic only to find that the social contract remains broken. And looming all over this is the shadow of war, the fear of great power conflict, even the unthinkable use of nuclear or biological weapons. This return of a danger we thought long behind us, particularly in Europe, has rekindled a deep and collective dread. Everywhere, people feel that the ground beneath them is shifting. The technology evolves faster than our ethics. The globalization outpaces our governance. And as wealth and power concentrate in ever fewer hands, many feel that the future itself has been taken hostage by the forces that can neither influence nor can be trusted. This deep insecurity can take us down two different paths. And this is the great challenge for Europe, not only. Can we choose a path of strategic autonomy, one that protects not only our physical borders, but also our democratic values, one that recognizes insecurity as a shared human condition and responds with solidarity, fairness, and courage, a path that rebuilds balance in our societies between rich and poor, between humanity and nature, between citizen and state, a strategic autonomy that does not reject multilateralism, but reinforces it, acknowledging that we can only meet these challenges together, ensuring a just transition to sustainable growth and shared security. The other path which we have to choose, is to be carried away by what some call the geography of discontent. The other path, the authoritarian temptation, which feeds on fear and division. It offers the illusion of strength in exchange for freedom, simple answers to complex problems, scapegoats instead of solutions. It thrives on resentment and polarization, promising security, but delivering submission. It is in truth the opposite of what we need. Instead of cooperation, it breeds nationalism. Instead of openness, it closes the mind. Instead of innovation, it retreats into a nostalgia for a mythical past and tradition. Our task, therefore, is not only to defend democracy from polarization, but to deepen it, to make democracy the antidote to insecurity. For when people feel seen, when they feel heard, when they feel empowered to shape their destinies, fear loses its power. The age of insecurity can become the age of renewal, if we have the courage to trust one another again. But we face another challenge, an ancient one reborn in modern form. So let me return to ancient Athens and a dialogue between Gorgias and Socrates. Gorgias, a master rhetorician, a kind of spin doctor of his time. He prided himself on teaching people how to speak persuasively and sway public opinion. For him, rhetoric was a tool of influence, a way to win debates, gain power or money, and dominate the opponents, with little concern about the deeper moral truth. Socrates challenged his view. He warned that rhetoric without ethical grounding is dangerous. It enables manipulation rather than meaningful dialogue. For Socrates, debate was never about victory or domination, but about the pursuit of understanding, a search for truth, for the common good. Plato went further. He saw democracy's downfall beginning with the misuse and distortion of language, when rhetoric becomes detached from the truth. Without shared meanings, public reason gives way to propaganda, disinformation, fake news, while law is supplanted by one's wishes. If Plato saw half of the US public believing that the 2020 elections were stolen, and Trump would have won, and on the other half, knowing that Biden was legitimately elected, he would warn us of democracy's downfall. And Plato's warning also implies something else, that democracy requires an ecosystem of public debate. Freedom of speech is not in a vacuum. It requires a shared space, meaning and culture of respectful dialogue. In ancient Greece, that was the Pnyx, a great open hill where Athenian citizens gathered to deliberate. There, each citizen, not everyone was citizens, of course, we know that. There was not a perfect democracy. Regardless of wealth or status, each one had one voice, one vote, and the right to speak freely and honestly before all others. The Pnyx had the architecture of equality, an ecosystem of listening and persuasion. One did not speak into an echo chamber, but before the eyes and ears of a fellow citizen, even an opponent, accountable to reason, ethics, and truth. To stand up on its stone platform, the Vima, was both a privilege and a responsibility. In the Pnyx, no one could hide behind anonymity or avatars. Each speaker faced the collective directly. The approving murmurs, the dissenting cries, the silence of reflection. Debate could be fierce, even passionate, but it was also bounded by rules. Who could speak, for how long, and in what manner? Those rules could be challenged, as Socrates did, yet their very existence protected the space, free space, and a space beyond chaos. The Pnyx was not perfect, but it was transparent. Speech had a face, and truth was a shared pursuit. Today, our public space, our space for dialogue, has been colonized by social media platforms. Its rules are written not by our elected assemblies, but by a handful of corporations in Silicon Valley and Shenzhen. These invisible powers decide what we see, what we believe, and too often what we fear. Their algorithms designed to capture attention and profit from emotion, reward outrage over understanding, division over dialogue. They connect us, yet increasingly tear us apart. The more we react, the more we click. The more we click, the more we polarized become. As writer Cory Doctorow calls it, this is the tyranny of optimization. Everything optimized for engagement, not for truth, not for well-being. When every thought, every person, every feeling is monetized, human beings become data points in someone else's business model. Truth gives way to virality, empathy gives way to performance. The logic of the market colonizes the logic of the mind. We celebrate influencers by the volume of their traffic, yet we rarely ask, where is this traffic headed? Democracy cannot survive in such a climate. Europe cannot survive in a public space controlled by such algorithms. And we need to really think of our autonomy of our digital space. For democracy and our union depend on trust, trust in one another, in institutions, and in a shared sense of reality. When our public sphere fragments into echo chambers, when the loudest voices drown out reason, insecurity turns into suspicion. If left unchecked, it becomes polarization, the corrosion of the common good. In its most extreme forms, polarization becomes poison, a slow corruption of the soul of society. It begins with words, with labels, with the quiet conviction that they are not like us. And soon it allows us to demonize the other, to see not a human being, but an enemy. Not a neighbor, but a threat. They cease to be people with hopes, fears, and dreams like ours. They become subhuman, unworthy of empathy, unworthy of life. And when that line is crossed, we see elimination of the other as a duty, and it becomes a horrific tragedy. And history has shown us where this path leads. Holocausts, genocides, ethnic cleansing, wars of extinction. From anti-Semitism to Islamophobia, racism to xenophobia. This is identity politics in its most toxic, when belonging in its most toxic form, when belonging becomes exclusion and conviction turns into hate, rather than a beautiful mosaic of shared power. It is the moment when democracy's language of difference gives way to the logic of war, when we replace argument with accusation and the citizen with the enemy. A common narrative suggests that democracy is under attack because we have these bad actors. We have these demagogues, these authoritarians, the manipulators who distort facts, reject science, and exploit fear for power. And so we tell ourselves that all we need to do is, let's excommunicate them, get rid of them. But I would argue otherwise. These figures are simply symptoms, not the cause. They emerge from a deeper erosion of democratic norms, from a slow decay of truth, trust, equality, justice, and the culture of dialogue itself. People are not turning away from democracy because they reject it. They are disillusioned because they see that our democracies are not living up to their own ideals and promises. If democracy is to survive, we must confront the root causes of polarization, the forces that corrode civic life and fracture our common worlds. And today we face a perfect storm. An economic storm where vast inequality and concentration of wealth in the hands of the global elite have hollowed out opportunity and justice. A technological storm where the agora of public debate, once a shared space of reason, has been privatized, transformed into a marketplace of attention ruled by profit-seeking algorithms, rewarding outrage. And together these forces have paved the way for a political capture of our democratic institutions and culture. A world where wealth buys speech, data replaces debate, and citizens become spectators in their own societies. Well, this is the challenge of our time. So let me close with a few thoughts. What can we do? First, let me share a concern, a fear even. The deeper problems confronting our democracies are not accidental. They are being exploited by those who hold concentrated power in order to protect their privileges, and by demagogues who find fertile ground in fear and resentment in order so that they can seize control. If we do not act now, this democratic backsliding could become permanent. And if that happens, we may wake up to find ourselves once again under the boot of totalitarianism, a system where freedom survives only as a memory. And I have lived under dictatorship. But then it may be too late, and regaining what we have lost could demand struggles far harder, even violent. than we can imagine. That is why we must act now while we still can. So I would like to end with two reflections. First, how to recognize the signs of authoritarianism and what each of us as citizens can do and resist. And second, how to imagine and build a radical renewal of democracy, a democracy bold enough to meet the challenges of our time. Having monitored many countries in the Council of Europe and watched trends even in the United States, I've gathered a few notes on how autocrats exploit our weaknesses and how citizens can resist. I will give you these in a little bit of a slogan form, because otherwise I would have to speak for maybe another hour. I will begin by saying what the autocrats do and then how we react. First, they say, act first, justify later. Power loves decisiveness, and legality can wait. What's the citizen's antidote? Defend due process. Demand transparency and accountability, even when inconvenient. Second, never apologize, never explain. Deny until truth itself collapses. Citizens' antidote, value honesty. Show that admitting mistakes is a mark of strength. Third, divide and conquer. Exploit religion, race, gender, and class to fracture solidarity and people's power. Shape a national identity that allows you to control who everyone is. Citizens' antidote, build bridges, stand with anyone targeted or vilified. Fourth, keep people poor and dependent. Destroy unions, healthcare, education. Obedience follows poverty. Citizens' antidote, fight for equity and strong public institutions that empower citizens. 5, control the story. Capture media, ban books, flood minds with lies. Citizens' antidote, defend truth. Support independent journalism and media literacy. 6, shatter trust and reality. Mock science, ridicule expertise, sow confusion. Citizens' antidote, protect reason through education, art, and open debate. 7, co-opt institutions. Fill courts with loyalists. Call critics foreign agents. Citizens' antidote, guard independence, uphold checks and balances. 8, weaponize order. Turn police and army against the weak, then against every dissenting voice. Citizens' antidote, insist on civilian control and the right to protest. 9, corrupt the economy, privatize gains, socialize loss, control the central bank, reward loyalty. Citizens' antidote, share prosperity, tax fairly, democratize ownership. 10, break international alliances. Isolation strengthens control. Citizens' antidote, rebuild cooperation and global solidarity. 11, legalize corruption. Let money rule politics. Citizens' antidote, demand transparency and clean campaign finances. 12, laugh at the law. Rule through impunity. Criminalize dissent. Citizens' antidote, no one above the law, no one beneath it. 13, manufacture cynicism. Convince people that nothing matters. Citizens' antidote, inspire hope. Remind each other that small acts of courage still shape history. 14, preserve the facade. Keep elections and courts, but hollow them of their meaning. Citizens' antidote, restore substance. Demand real choice and real justice. 15, exhaust the people. Confuse, distract, entertain until they give up. Citizens' antidote, revive citizenship, rest, reflect, organize, act locally. Democracy is daily care. So the story of democracy has always been one of renewal, of people reclaiming their voice and reshaping power for the common good. We often speak of defending democracy, but today we must also learn to pre-think it. Use imagination, as you were mentioning. Politics is to use our imagination about a better future. Let's imagine the next evolution, drawing from the best practices humanity has to offer, ancient and modern. I call this radical democracy, not because it is extreme, but because it returns to democracy's roots, or radix, in active citizenship, shared responsibility, reasoned deliberation. Switzerland, of course, offers one of the most enduring antidotes to authoritarianism, a democracy designed not merely to vote, but to breathe. Its institutions disperse power, embed direct citizen control, cultivate a culture of consensus. It's no coincidence that Ioannis Kapodistrias, the Greek statesman who helped shape the Swiss federal constitution in 1815, infused it with a spirit of Greek civic humanism and enlightenment rationality. The idea that liberty flourishes not through domination, but through balanced dialogue and the consent of the governed. The Swiss model reminds us that tyranny thrives where power is concentrated and citizens are passive. Democracy endures where power is dispersed and participation is real, where the demos unites in principles, not divisions, and where dialogue replaces imposition. In essence, democracy is not a machine for majority rule. It is a living organism of mutual trust. And reclaiming democracy means reclaiming power, not to centralize it, but to distribute it again. Through global taxation that restores fairness and limits oligarchic control, democratic oversight of financial and digital empires that shape our lives, participatory institutions, citizens' assemblies, local digital agoras, where deliberation replaces manipulation, and education that forms citizens, not merely consumers or professionals, cultivating critical thought, ethical judgment, civic courage. I have long argued we need a fourth branch of governance. It could be through citizens' assemblies or through an online e-agora, a participative and deliberative branch that gives citizens a continuous voice in shaping the decisions that affect their lives. And if we are to renew faith in democracy, we must further democratize the spaces where power truly lies: our economies, our workplaces, our technologies. Political democracy alone is not enough when economic and digital, thank you very much, when economic and digital life remain dominated by distant shareholders and opaque algorithms. I once proposed that the European Union or the Council of Europe should buy up Twitter rather than Elon Musk. Think of it. Why is an oligarch able, with his money, to buy up a public platform like Twitter and influence not only his country, but millions and millions of people around the world? And why not our parliaments not have such an instrument where we would deliberate real policies, but also the rules of debate in order to create good debate, but also find consensual solutions? But why also are we not thinking that maybe we, the users, should own these platforms? We are the new oil, as they say. We are the data which they give. So extending democracy into the economic realm is both a moral and practical imperative. Let's think of worker-owned cooperatives, community land trusts, platform cooperatives, renewable energy communities. All show that participation creates not only fairness, but also innovation, resilience, and trust. These forms of shared ownership and deliberative decision-making transform the economy itself into a school of citizenship where individuals learn agency, empathy, solidarity. They gain agency, with it responsibility, and with it knowledge. They are the best antidote to cynicism, to disinformation, to alienation. We can be encouraged that we see that some of these thoughts are now taking part in the European Union. Following the conference on the future of Europe 2 years ago, hundreds of citizens came together to deliberate on our shared challenges, from climate to digital transformation, from social justice to intergenerational fairness. Today, the European citizens' panels continue this work, proving that large-scale participation is possible and effective. Panels on food waste, energy efficiency, virtual worlds, and now intergenerational fairness have shown that when citizens deliberate together, they produce thoughtful, forward-looking solutions. This new generation of participatory governance does more than enrich policy. It reconnects citizens with Europe, transforming institutions from distant bureaucracies into living spaces of common purposes. As Commissioner Mikalev has reminded us, intergenerational fairness is not an elite agenda. It is a democratic one. To care for the young, the old, and the unborn, to ensure that decisions made today do not rob tomorrow, this is the soul of European democracy. Democracy must once again become the art of the common good. Building community where isolation and alienation reign, it began in the Greek polis, where free citizens gathered not merely to rule, but to deliberate, to belong, to discover what justice and virtue demanded of them. Today, our polis is actually our planet. And if democracy was once about governing a city, it must now be about governing humanity, a shared destiny. An odyssey, a challenge of a difficult path to shape our climate, our technologies, our economies, and our peace. To do so, we must rediscover its essence: equality, participation, accountability, belonging, and the care for the future. Only then can democracy be reinvented, not as a relic of the past, but as a promise of the future. A system not of control, but of co-creation, not of domination, but of dialogue, not of fear, but of shared hope. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for an inspiring, but also somehow scary presentation. I think in many ways, you went beyond the question that is the title of the talk. I mean, what we see, and I think what you propose is that polarization is not the risk, but it's the consequence of the deterioration of democracy. And in that sense, the challenge becomes even bigger, right? Because if to think about democracy is to think about dialogue, I think that the risk might be less polarization, but more the fact that people are not interested anymore in dialogue. And I think that's clear. I mean, we talk a lot about polarization, but maybe one of the main risks is that people are not interested in politics anymore. So youth are not going to vote, and people in general, even in Switzerland, we know that most polls that we have, it's lower 50%, the presence. So how can we make people interested in democracy again if at the same time we are telling them that democracy is not working? How would you respond to that?
That's a good question. When I said that it's not, that polarization is a result and not a cause, I say that because, and hopefully it makes it more difficult, but also maybe clearer and easier to deal with, because if we say that polarization is the problem, then we just have to get rid of the people that polarize. But polarization is a result of things, and that's what I was analyzing. It's a result of the fact that people have felt disempowered, that people feel they don't have a future. In many parts of the world, and in many of our societies, there is a big divide and sense of injustice. People have difficulties. There's precarity, as it's called, or the sense of insecurity, many forms of insecurity. the types of jobs or the future of jobs that we have. Of course, the big issues of climate, even war. These are existential threats. So all this, and of course in a globalized society, we are still local governments, we are national governments. It's not so simple. When I had to deal with the financial situation, the crisis in Greece, initially Angela Merkel said, yeah, it's a Greek problem, you know, you just deal with it, take measures, everybody will understand. It was a Greek problem, but it was not only a Greek problem, it was a wider financial problem. And until Europe decided, as Europe, to make really strong measures, Greece would not have been able to deal with it, nor would Europe have been able to deal with it, simply thinking that Greece could, which was the only problem. So what I'm saying is that I don't think that people are not interested in politics. They are not interested in the type of politics we have today. They feel that, I mean, I've been in politics many years of my life. I've seen it slowly change, but what I also see is that the money you need to be in politics, I don't know how it is in Switzerland, the media you need, the bullying on social media, the type of people that can you know, sustain this and their families, means that representative democracy is being pressured. So maybe we need to keep representative democracy and save it as much as possible from these capture of these big interests. I had a friend in California. He was actually Greek-American, and he ran for governor of California against Arnold Schwarzenegger. He didn't have much of a chance, but he told me that he paid about 80 million just for his primary. It wasn't his money. He had to go around. But when you go around asking for this money, you are beholden to those who... So how can you represent your citizens when you have gained power through this type of a system? So somehow with representative democracy, we have a contradiction. I'm here to represent my people, but I'm also here to fight for power. Now, what is going to win over? Am I going to really represent my people in an ethical way, or am I going to do anything I can to get into power? How I tweet, how I use social media, how I get money, how I convince television stations or whatever else. So this is why we need to see, of course, how we save, through these deep inequalities, we have the massive concentration of power by some people, these oligarchs, and we have smaller or bigger oligarchs in our societies. Some of them are more interested in getting into politics, some less. But if they do, they have a lot of power to influence. So then, what if we asked our citizens to be more active, but that they felt that they had a voice, not just to come and vote? And in Switzerland, you do have votes, but you have a more active citizenship because you have referenda, you have more dispersed power, you have a rotating system of leadership, which also is somewhat important in not entrenching power. What if we said to our, as the ancient Greeks said at some point, yes, you know, I'm going to randomly choose citizens, randomly. I want to get a citizens' assembly who will be representative of our society. What does that mean? It means that the average citizen has a voice. And not everyone, but it's the average citizen. It's not a politician, it's not a representative only, it's the average citizen. Secondly, as the ancient Greeks did, now we are using this also in our modern times, we say we want you to deliberate on an issue for, let's say, 6 months. So your power is only for 6 months. And you're not very easily lobbied or corrupted. So let's say Ireland, for example, had a big problem about what they would do about abortion. A Catholic country, very much religiously against the idea of abortion, but there were people demanding to discuss it and maybe change the Constitution. So they actually did a citizens' assembly for 6 months, randomly selected. So you had from, all the hierarchy of the society. They sat for 6 months, they listened to experts, they talked amongst themselves, and they proposed at the end that there be a change in Constitution. That went to a referendum, and the Constitution was changed in favor of abortion. Now, not always does it work out that well. In France, Macron did a citizens' assembly for climate change after the Gilets jaunes, the yellow jackets, who were people who were workers, basically, going to work, but then when taxes were put on carbon or on petrol, they reacted because it was very expensive. And it was hitting the poor. So then you had the Citizens' Assembly where they came up with ideas. Some of these were implemented. It actually helped diffuse the conflict. What if we therefore think that this should be a permanent procedure where citizens can have a voice? But let me just add another example. We have our Facebooks and our Instagrams and our whatever else, TikToks and so on. What if we had the similar type of platform, but for our policies, where people could, have their opinions every day, where they could talk about it, and which this would be deliberation for the decisions made by politicians. It wouldn't be easy, but maybe it would be much better. And it wouldn't be a vote every 2 years or every 4 years or, every referenda, but it could be, a decision or at least a deliberation every day. That would mean that people felt they were empowered, they would be discussing, and you would do it in a way where you would have to be known who you were. You could not have bots. You could not have bots from some big oligarch or from maybe Russian propaganda to come and try to change it. You would have citizens being able to know who was speaking on the other side and have a real debate. But you also have algorithms that would not create hate, not for profit, not for simply attention, but help the discussion, because we can change. These algorithms are laws, basically. We can change these laws as we like to make them positive for participation and consensus building rather than hate and division. So these are just some ideas, and I think when I have seen, in my experience, that you actually give responsibility to people and respect their views, yes, they do like that politics, but that's the kind of politics we need.
Thank you for bringing some hope. I don't know if people are ready with questions. I have others on my notes, but there is a hand here. I don't know if there is a microphone around. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. My name is Karina, I'm Brazilian. I'll try to be quick. I just wanted to know what do you think about the situation in Brazil?
About which?
The situation in Brazil that we had a former president that was recently convicted, exactly because of some attacks against democracy. I don't know if you're aware about it, and I wanted to know if you have some tips for the Brazilians to deal with the situation. Thank you.
Well, I'm not an expert in the situation in Brazil, but I understand that Bolsonaro was following Trump's example, storming the Capitol, denying the election results. Unluckily, in the U.S., the legal system was not strong enough because this was not only a protest, this was a revolt against democratic institutions. The people of the United States voted for Joe Biden. So, and then you had people coming in, even threatening to kill. People were injured and killed, but they were threatening to also kill the lawmakers. Yeah, that in most any democratic country would mean punishment. Well, in the US, you had Trump granting amnesty to all of them, And in Brazil, you had the justice system actually punish Bolsonaro. Unfortunately, Donald Trump sent a letter, put tariffs on Brazil. I think it's 50% tariffs. Is that what it is? And the letter begins, before it talks about the tariffs, says you have to free, or you have to stop going after, it was before he was jailed, you have to stop going after Bolsonaro. And you know, I have 50, but we won't talk about tariffs if you don't free Bolsonaro. Well, I think this is just shows that we are facing a real undermining of the rule of law, of justice, and this, if this continues to develop, this will create not only polarized societies but violence in our societies. People feel that you know, whoever is powerful can rule and demand, whether it's right or wrong. People will react. Maybe initially with fear, maybe initially quiet, but at some point, this will blow up. So Brazil is on a better path than the United States right now.
As a fellow Brazilian, it's one of those moments in history that we are happy about the way things are working. We don't know how long it's going to last.
And you had the courage to stand up for your values.
And I think it also shows that at moments people actually go to the streets beyond polarization, because right after the condemnation there were some attempts of the Congress to roll back, and people actually went to the streets beyond polarization to respect institutions. So maybe they are hearing your slogans.
I hope so. Well, yeah.
Any other questions? I see a hand there in the back. Here you go.
Hi, thank you. I wanted to say, first of all, thank you for this amazing talk. And my name is Marie-Laure. I'm half Spanish and Costa Rican. I wanted to talk about democracy and journalism, because I was thinking if we want to regain that interest that you were talking about and creating these forums where people can discuss political issues, before regaining trust in democracy, I think we need to regain trust in journalism and independent journalism. But how can we do that? Like, how can we convince people that have lost trust and interest in that it's important for democracy? I know it's a huge question, but I think about it a lot. So, yeah, thank you.
I mean, it's a good question, and I think we have really independent journalism. We may have journalists that are fighting for freedom, well, their freedom to write their opinion or to write what they see. But if you look at the ownership of media, and I'm not talking about, you know, authoritarian countries where you have basically controlled by the state or by the ruler. I'm talking about our free world, so-called free world. We have media that now is more and more concentrated in the hands of some of these very wealthy oligarchs and corporations. And they don't seem to be strong enough to stand up to authoritarianism. So I can understand the mistrust. But journalists are being attacked. In the Council of Europe, this year we have the Václav Havel Prize every year. This year was given to a journalist. They decided it had to go to a journalist because journalism has been attacked in so many ways, and so many journalists have been killed. In Gaza, for example, hundreds and hundreds, which basically was to silence or to not allow pictures and images or what stories were coming out. Of course, social media has allowed that. But then social media, which initially when the internet was created, I remember the beginning, maybe you were too young to remember that. This was sort of a dream of a free space where everybody could not only have the freedom of their speech, but it wouldn't be dominated by one person. It wouldn't be dominated by power. It would be sort of a democratic anarchy in a way, sort of anarchistic kind of, but in a nice way, anarchistic in the sense that nobody had power. Well, this has changed. This has changed. These have become big private corporations looking for profit, and it doesn't matter whether it's truth or not, as long as it makes profit. So I don't care if what I'm saying or what you're saying, or the corporation doesn't care what you're saying is really true or not. There have been some limitations because of suicides, because of some acts of violence and so on. But generally, no, you can say anything you want, bully, bots, and so on, and lose the sense of what is true and what is not. So I'm not in favor of censorship, but freedom of speech needs some rules. It needs to be protected. It needs some guidelines. It needs some basic ethical basis. So it's a fight. I think we need to struggle for some of these things. These things are not going to come, just out of God's will. It's going to be a struggle where powers are, fighting for control. And I think our citizens need to fight for the control of media. What if, let's say, Facebook was owned by everyone who uses Facebook? That'd be interesting. It'd be interesting to see how that would be governed. But maybe you would sit down and say, okay, what are the rules we should put to really make truth come out, or at least understanding? Truth is a difficult word. How do you find truth? Because people can see the same event and look at it different ways, but at least you can say that there are some basic things we can agree on, and we can talk about them and at least find some common understanding. So the debates and the discussions and the freedom of speech and so on are issues which I think have been undermined in this ecosystem of social media, this machine learning, which basically learns how to manipulate our psychology to make us, for profit making. And that's not what democracy is. Democracy is to really debate about our real issues, not just for profit, but for how we are going to live together in a just society.
Other questions I see here?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. It was really extremely interesting. I would like to ask you, sorry, I did not introduce myself. I'm Rima Raymond. I'm a conference interpreter. I just wanted to ask you, where do you put the danger and the peril of AI in this full spectrum? Isn't it also a risk contributing to the erosion of so many things, so many sectors in life? So you are speaking about the free opinions, encouraging people to take part of political life and so on. So what about AI in all this? Isn't it also a threat that would contribute in the bad sense? Thank you.
Yes, I think I will generalize it and then talk about AI. We have, as humanity, created amazing power, technology. I mean, throughout our history, we have always been innovative, new types of power. But now we've reached technological capacity, which is almost godlike. It's immense power. So the real question is, how do we use this power? And who decides how we use it? You can theoretically say it should be used for the common good, but who decides what this common good is? And so whether it's nuclear, whether it's biotechnology, whether it's quantum physics, whether it is AI now, the question really is, how do we make sure that these technologies are used for the common good to solve problems, to deal with problems which we can deal with, whether it's climate change or, social health problems or so on. They could be amazing tools. But who governs these? And with AI and with some of these other technologies, if you have a fight for power, whether it's oligarchic power who is going to be the company that's going to come up with the new invention or the new innovation to be better than the other one and therefore make more profit. Or if you have a geopolitical competition, for example, between the US and China, which exists, on AI, we are going to be trying to make more and more powerful AI for military reasons. That is dangerous. So we need to find ways at the national, regional, European, and global way to control or to put some guardrails, to decide what we use it for. I think it's childish, immature, and dangerous that the US and China are not sitting down together. Actually, they are, but I don't know how they're moving, but they should really sit down together. How are we going to deal with AI? Now, AI has one other aspect which is new, and I'm not an expert to tell you. It's a black box. What does that mean? We don't know where it will go. We don't know if this technology can become so powerful that it will overpower human beings. I've heard people who are experts in AI fear that this could become the end of humanity, or we all become somehow controlled or become robots ourselves. I don't know, but I mean, these are things that and some of these people say, that's fine, that's great. Yeah, that's just part of human evolution. We will be extinct and something else will come. Well, you know, you don't play with these things. It's very, very dangerous to play with these things. And particularly not to let some people, just because they have power, just because they have the technology, make decisions that could affect the future of humanity. So I think this is a hugely big democratic challenge. So we do need to protest and wake up and really come back, you know, bring back power to our people.
Any questions? I see a hand on the back.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I just wanted to ask, what do you see as a position of migrants in a new democracy, especially in terms of situations where they are part of a society but often not able to vote? So either as migrant workers or asylum seekers or refugees who are really often at the bottom and do feel a lot of the strain but are never able to necessarily speak out. What do you see as that position maybe in a radical democracy? Thank you.
I was talking about that exact issue with the head of the ILO this morning. And actually I was mentioning that this is an issue that we have a working class, not only, but a wide working class, a large part of the working class that has maybe good working conditions, maybe, not always, but no real voice as citizens to vote, most of them. And in Europe, either from third countries or even from within the European Union, because there's a large migration from Eastern Europe to Western Europe, I mean, from Southern Europe to Northern Europe, and people who work don't usually have the possibility to vote where they are, and usually they it's a difficulty, very often very difficult, because you don't always have the types of distance voting or electronic voting and so on to vote in your country. So these are human beings without all their rights. So I think that is a big problem. When I was Prime Minister, I legislated to allow all migrants to at least vote in local elections, even though they did not have citizenship. Unluckily, the opposition party took this to the Supreme Court in Greece, and the Supreme Court struck the law down, saying that you have to be, it's very, if you like, archaic idea that you have to be Greek in DNA. But who's Greek in DNA? I don't know. We all have our mixed DNAs. Actually, in ancient Greece, there was a discussion about this, and Clisthenes who was one of the reformers, decided to give citizenship to migrants in Athens. And then there was somebody called Isocrates. He was a bit ahead of his time, not Socrates, but Isocrates. And he said, well, what does that mean for being Greek? He said, well, in the end, being Greek is having a Greek education. So, not DNA, not color, not where you come from, not your religion, it's just having a Greek education. So, I think we need to bring that concept to our societies more and more, and of course many of our societies do have more progressive policies on this. But what I see is migration has become weaponized by the ultra-right. They love the issue. They thrive on the issue. They would not exist with this problem. And that's why they want to keep this problem alive, even if it's not a problem. It is an issue, of course, but if you think about it, it is combined with many other problems. So people feel that the social system is not working for them, that their health care is not working, that education maybe not be the best, the costs and so on, and then it's easy to blame something. And these demagogues come and blame the migrants. They say they are the ones that are the problem. And it seems to work. Now, I myself was not only a migrant, I was a refugee. My father was a refugee at some point. My grandfather was a refugee at some point. My great-grandfather was a refugee. So I think we need to rethink how we deal with migrants in a positive sense. It's not an easy, because yes, when Greece had, let's say, 1 million people come over its border, it's not easy for society to absorb this. So there need to be some regulation, some rules, and some ways to deal with it. And this, of course, has been a problem in many parts of Europe that received migrants or refugees. But to demonize the issue is not going to solve it. To think that we can close borders and solve it is not true. To think that migrants are going to destroy our culture is not true. To think that they are not a positive part of our society is not true. To think that they cannot be a positive part of their former homeland is also not true. Because when I was in Sweden and I was in exile, I then came back to my country, got into politics, and Olof Palme, he was the prime minister then, called me up and he said, "Can you come and campaign with me?" And I said, "Sure, I'd be honored." So I was just a deputy in Parliament, and I went to Sweden, and we traveled around Sweden, and he started talking about how important refugees and migrants are for the country. Not only because of the culture, but also what they bring, their ideas, but also that they may go back at some point and become architects of changing their own societies. You know, we migrants, we refugees, we are change agents. We left our country for some reason. Something was wrong there. It didn't work. So we are people that are change agents. We should be seen as change agents for our societies, for our countries. So all the Syrians that came to Europe, I think we should have invested more in them. We should have helped them. We should have given them civic education. We should have told them how democracy works. They are now going back. They will be the architects of a new Syria. Can you imagine the investment, rather than now trying to rebuild Syria with, I don't know how, foreign aid and so on, if we had invested in the human beings that were here in Europe and now going back in a way to prepare them for a future society? Olof Palme would then go around and say, you know, we had Willy Brandt, we had Oliver Tambo from South Africa, who was working with Mandela, we had Bruno Kreisky, and many others. So my feeling is, yes, it's an issue, but it's an issue which we can solve and actually can use for our societies. In Greece, we had maybe, when Albania fell apart, we had about 500,000 Albanians come in. I happened to be, a few years later, I happened to be Minister of Education, and there was a Minister of Foreign Affairs. We talked about it, and we had all these kids. There were these Albanian kids. They were not going to school because they did not have papers. They were undocumented. We said, that's crazy. Put them in schools. Albanians today are integrated in Greek society, doing well, opening companies, thriving. They're great. So I think we really have to rethink. And of course, there are other issues too. Europe is aging, there are demographic problems, while other parts of the world are growing. Africa is maybe the quickest growing demographically. So we have to think about so we have to invest in the future of migration. Migration is a historical thing that will never stop in the world, but we can at least regulate it, and I think that is much better than making it a big thing. One more point on this, because I think it's quite important. I see, for example, Viktor Orban in Hungary. He talks incessantly about the fear of migration, the fear of refugees, the fear of LGBTQ, the fear of foreign interference. You know what he's really doing? That's a smokescreen. Behind that, he is gaining more power, he is being more corrupt, he is undermining social media, he is controlling media, he's surveilling people, he is using the government to go against his, through either the tax offices or justice against his opponents. So all this is a smokescreen for some people just to have power. And I see the same thing now in the United States.
Thank you for your answer, for the question. I think it's a great way to end this talk. I mean, we are in a room that I think a lot of us are migrants or people on the move. So thank you also for acknowledging that. And please join me in thanking our speaker.